Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. It looks like we have 42 participants. I'd like to welcome all of you this morning to another BCHFA webinar. Those of you who heard me earlier, if you're here to learn about e-bikes and about what the different agencies are doing with respect to the e-bike, you're in the right place this morning. This webinar is pretty well put together by Randy Rasmussen. I'm Brad Pullman, your public lands chairman for BCHFA. I've been a backcountry horseman for about 20 years, and my chapter was started in 1976. So I come with a lot of my own experience and experience from my chapter from many years. We work both with the National Forest, mostly, but we do a lot with different state lands. The other presenter, or the main presenter, is, of course, Randy Rasmussen, and most of you know him. Those of you who don't or haven't had any firsthand contact with him, I think you'll agree with me at the end of this webinar that he is a great asset for BCHFA and its mission, and you'll be pleasantly pleased with his performance as our public lands director. I'd also like to introduce Craig Allen. Comes from the great state of Utah, and he is the chairman of the education committee for BCHFA, which is a major task. And we want to thank him for his work in helping us get this webinar business all up and running this morning, and all he does. With that being said, I'll get started. This webinar should take about an hour for our presentation, maybe a little over, depending on whether Randy checks me up or not. And we'll do some question and answering at the end. And I'll start with giving Craig the floor to see if there's any housekeeping business or anything he needs to inform you about how to make this successful. Craig?
Okay. Hey, I'm busy processing a bunch of latecomers in here, so bear with me a little bit. But the main thing is that the webinar attendees will be on mute. If you want to ask a question at any time during the presentation, go down to the bottom of your listing of your page, and you can enter a question. And I understand that everyone, all of the questions are going. We're going to try to answer all of the questions before we leave today. So, and there'll be a recording made of this webinar, and you'll be notified through the newsletter on how to get a hold of that in the future if you need it. So with those two things, remember the Q&A, and we'll let you know about the recordings. So with that, I think I've now processed everybody. I have no pending approvals. And just so you know, we had 238 approved attendees. So go ahead, Brad.
Thank you, Craig. Well, I'm going to start like I always do with the presentations, whether it be at a board meeting or a webinar. And I'm going to start with explaining to you, if you haven't heard it before, it'll be new. If not, if you have, well, pay attention. We need to keep rehearsing it until we get it right. I'm going to talk to you about the structure of the Public Lands Committee. It starts at the bottom, like our organization. I hope to have at least one person, if not two, in each chapter that is in charge of public lands. And what that means is that they'll take care of communications with our partners, both agency partners and other partners, regularly, and pass that information up to their chapter, and from their chapter to their states. And that's when we start getting involved. The states will be meeting monthly with their regional public lands. And then I attend some of those meetings, but I also have a national public lands meeting where there's two co-chairs from each region, and we pass that information from the bottom all the way up. And that's when we can kind of see where and what we can help with on a national level. And a lot of times the problems can be solved on a state level, working with the neighboring states and like terrain and like issues. So that's important to know, because this particular issue with the e-bikes is going to be handled pretty much on a case-by-case basis from the forests or from the governing agencies, whether it be BLM or national parks or Bureau of Land or state organizations, state parks, state wildlife. So this issue is going to come up at that level, and we need to keep informed on a national level so that we can help marry up the information you need and have a united response and a consistent response. So that's what's really important, that line of communication and the way that the structure of the Public Lands Committee works is exercised in this issue, because it's going to be hit and miss, and it's going to be over a long period of time. Some of you, if you're here today, you're probably already experiencing problems with this issue. We're recording this so that we can use it down the road for those who aren't going to experience the issue until later on, but it's all going to be about the same. So with that being said, that's my covering on the structure of the Public Lands Committee and why we're here today. Randy, I'm going to give the floor to Randy, and he's going to start talking to you about e-bikes and what they're about. I'll come back on later in the program and talk to you about coalitions and communications with your locals. I hope you enjoy this, and we'll talk to you later. Randy, floor is yours.
Excellent, Brad. Thank you. And thank you, Craig. These slides that we're showing, in addition to the recorded version of this webinar, will also be on BCHA's member website for future reference. And Brad's correct. A lot of you may not have come up against the e-bike issue yet. So this is something that we hope to keep in the archives for reference in the future as those new proposals come along. So I'm speaking to you from Western Oregon, and we'll just get right into it here. Here's a picture, and the key word here is motorized. Even though it's electric, e-bikes are motorized, and we'll talk about why that's critical. And on many of the e-bike brands, you can hardly tell the difference between that and a regular mountain bike. So here's an example, and I want you to look closely at the crankcase. And in this case, you know, that's where the motor rests. And the battery, I'll give you a cutaway here. The battery's in the down tube. So these are getting more and more, let's call it stealth technology. And there's some e-bike advertisers or manufacturers who even tout the fact that you can't tell it's an e-bike. That's problematic for obvious reasons as we get into the enforcement issue. But we've got battery, we've got a motor, an extra battery, or what's called a range extender, that are sometimes on a bike, oftentimes not. So just want to let folks become familiar with what an e-bike is. And then you've got your computer controller up here, usually a little LED interface that allows the user, or it's on the handlebars, allows the user to make adjustments on an e-bike. So let me start though by talking about the benefits of e-bikes, because we can't deny them. And you can probably read for yourself these 3 bullets I have here. There's several benefits, particularly in the terms of a commuter style e-bike for people getting around town, you know, staying out of their cars, being active. There's also an issue, something called adaptive mountain biking for the adaptive community, the disability community, if you will. That's a separate topic, but it's one we need to keep in mind as we go forward about this issue, because as we get into splitting hairs about who and who should not perhaps be on an e-bike, we've got to keep that in mind. So, you know, again, I want to just start with the benefits of e-bikes, because we're not here to bash people who use e-bikes, to you know, pretend as if this technology won't take hold, because it already has, and it certainly has a future, you know, in the U.S. and on U.S. public lands. So the question becomes more of then how do we deal with it appropriately? So back to e-bikes. Not all e-bikes are the same, and perhaps you've known this already. On the left of the picture here, we have what I call a garden variety e-bike, where the motor assist cuts out at 20 miles per hour. I've rented such e-bikes. You can go faster than 20 miles per hour. It's feasible, and I'm not talking just about downhill. I'm talking about on the flats. And then here's a picture on the right of what I call an out-of-class e-bike. That is beyond the classification system that we'll talk about in a second. But I ask you, which of these two parties would you rather encounter on a trail? There's certainly one who's, looks like they're there to tear up the trail and go fast, and there's another party there that looking like they're just trying to have fun and get outdoors. So keep that in mind too as we move along. So here's the trail classification system that the Consumer Product Safety Commission developed several years ago in the context of e-bikes on streets and on paved paths. It doesn't really lend itself well to trails, natural surface trails that we enjoy, but that's the system we're stuck with, and so we need to understand that. On the right is an advertisement from an e-bike manufacturer flying up the hills. That's one of our big concerns. With e-bikes, it used to be, with regular mountain bikes, used to be one might have to look ahead, scan the switchbacks as you're going up a slope. Now with e-bikes have potential to go much faster on the flats and up hills, we might have to be on our mounts looking forward and backwards oftentimes. That changes the whole experience, if you ask me. So the classes, the class 1 and class 3 are pedal assist. The motor will not operate unless you actually pedal to some degree, but there's differences in speed, as you can see. The class 3, which we're not seeing authorized very often on public lands, has a maximum assisted speed of 28 miles per hour. Now that's pretty darn fast. And the class 2 is problematic also because it is a throttle assist, no pedaling required. That's a problem. But we're also seeing problems with class 1 just because that relative speed, 20 miles per hour or more, is very fast compared to what we're used to on single track trails. I just want to point out too that the maximum wattage for an e-bike under all 3 classes is 750 watts. So with that in mind, one asks which e-bike in this picture is legal on non-motorized trails on our public lands. And I don't know if you can see very closely, but they all look the same. But this is a screen grab from a video. It's only the bike on the right that is 750 watts and meets the specifications. The other 2, center and left, are out of class e-bikes, but you never tell on appearances alone. Here's some more out of class e-bikes, kind of on a scale from e-bike to electric motorcycle to almost full-on motorcycle here. Just wanting to let you know there's a variety of brands that are being sold in the US and imported that all have pedals. The one on the lower right there looks like a motorcycle, but it has pedals, and I can see someone trying to make the case that it's an e-bike. So let's get into what our federal agencies are doing and some key takeaways. A couple years ago, the Department of Interior issued a secretarial order. Basically, without any public fanfare or discussion or input, the Secretary of Interior at the time, David Bernhardt, gave the industry everything they wanted and more. Basically, that all the Department of Interior agencies, Park Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Bureau of Land Management, etc., all need to adopt this 3-class e-bike system. And as you can read in there, that e-bikes shall be allowed where other types of bicycles are allowed. E-bikes shall not be allowed where other types of bicycles are prohibited. So at least wilderness is safe from legal intrusion by electric motorized bikes. And most national scenic trails are too. However, by just waving the wand, the Secretary basically said that these interior agencies shall, basically expedite this order and allow e-bikes everywhere regular bikes are allowed. That didn't sit well with us and our colleagues. And we made it pretty clear that we don't want to see e-bikes in general on non-motorized trails. And so we and the Wilderness Society and these other partners gathered a petition and sent that to the federal agencies, including the Forest Service, because we heard rumblings that they were looking at e-bikes too under the past administration. But there was unified opposition that we didn't want to see a policy change that would just essentially pave the way for motorized use on non-motorized trails. So let's look at the agencies independently. As a result, the National Park Service can make decisions at each Park Service unit via the Superintendent's Compendium. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Superintendent's Compendium, you can go to each park website, and under park planning, etc., they'll have the compendium of is basically regulations for that specific park unit. What this does, though, is often bypasses a public process, and we have many national park units that have authorized e-bike use without any public input, and that's really unfortunate. You can see from the list at the bottom here some of the national park units that I have what I call a substantial amount of backcountry, mountain bike trails, where this, if you want to call it threat, where this threat is greatest, this proposal to add e-bikes unilaterally without public input. And there's more park units where that's the case, many of which just have one or two trails, a lot of which are front country or even on roads and paved paths like in, Zion or other places I'm thinking of, where that probably won't be an issue for us. The problem is the lack of public process the Park Service can have. So here's an example, an area that has lots of natural surface trails, and the Park Service there in the Golden Gate National Recreation Area basically said, we categorically exclude these conversions of trails to e-bike use without public input and without environmental analysis. That's how much leeway that secretarial order gave park superintendents. I want to switch over to the Forest Service just to remind you it's not a DOI agency, it's under the Department of Agriculture. Was wrestling with this issue too, and most recently, just earlier this year, actually in March, they issued their final directives. So there's no secretarial order telling the Forest Service what they should do. They just took it upon themselves to update their regulations because e-bikes are certainly an evolving technology. And I think that's a good thing. The Forest Service got ahead of it, and they went in an opposite way that the Department of Interior did. So our friends at the Forest Service, I believe, did the right thing. And we're very concerned about preserving traditional recreational experiences, be that hike, horse, etc., and creating a high bar for when e-bikes would be added to non-motorized trails. So basically they updated their manual. It wasn't a whole different rulemaking process like the interior agencies did. But they continue to manage e-bikes as a motorized mode of travel, motorized vehicle. And they have certain regulations, therefore, under the travel management rule for the Forest Service. It's interesting throughout that process, there were over 6,000 unique comments. There were thousands and thousands of group comment letters or whatnot, but interesting spread with only 33% supporting e-bike use in a general sense and 58% opposed to shared trails with e-bike use. That's neither here nor there, but it's an interesting note to see where folks that commented on the Forest Service regulations were. And I want to link this back then because the Bureau of Land Management, an interior agency, who basically declared that e-bikes are no longer considered off-road vehicles. And I can get that to a degree. They don't have the noise, they don't have the air emissions that a typical off-road vehicle has. There are some common links, though, between what the BLM and Forest Service have done moving forward and how we and you are going to likely enter the e-bike discussion. And it's relatively good news. There's process involved where we can be engaged. It's not like the Park Service setup. So e-bike use is only authorized on trails and routes after they're formally designated for motorized use. That has to be made at the local level through a public process and environmental review. So those are some good, standard bars of that have to be passed here before one can do it. But I want to make it clear, though, the Forest Service and the BLM can still designate any of those classes of e-bikes on non-motorized trails. It's just they have to go through the travel management rule and document this and all the other steps. So, But fortunately, we should be aware of those proposals. They'll be announced publicly. Will be stakeholders that are engaged. They're going to do an environmental review at some level that allow us to also engage and comment publicly. And then ultimately, these agencies have to update their motor vehicle use map before it's official. So that's been done in only a few places I know of where either agency has gone through that process and authorized e-bike use on non-motorized trails. But we're going to see a trend of more and more proposals coming at us at a fast rate to do that now that the bar has been set, and the agencies, including the Forest Service, are sharing their kind of model template, if you will, of how to authorize e-bike use, for better or for worse. Here's something I want to point out to you, though. There is no current science, and I'm talking about peer-reviewed science, the high bar, that supports adding e-bikes to non-motorized trails. In fact, what you and I know, and what most people can say, is that there's problems with adding e-bikes. It could be erosion of certain trail segments depending on your soil and how the trail's laid out. Certainly there's conflict issues with other users, we know that. But I guess the take home for this one is, don't take it for granted when anybody says the science shows that e-bikes are no different than regular mountain bikes. They are not. We have a slide later that talks about a study by the International Mountain Bicycling Association from 2016 or so. And they did a comparison with regular mountain bikes and class 1 e-bikes. And they found a few subtle differences, but in general, their conclusion was that there's not a whole lot of difference. Well, that's not good enough. And it's only in one ecotype, that was Western Oregon. That can't be applied to Utah, for example, or any other different ecotype. So there is no science out there, especially science done by true scientists in a university setting and having it reviewed by others' peers. So this is important as we move forward, because we're seeing more and more claims from the agencies that, oh, the science has already shown us this. Not the case. And the second bullet there about the Federal Highway Administration, they've issued a study already saying there is no science on the matter. There needs to be more. So bottom line is, don't believe it when you're told that e-bikes are just like regular mountain bikes in terms of impact. So here's what's near and dear to our hearts, is about displacing our use. We go out of our way to get away from fast moving vehicles. We select trails that we know that are quiet, peaceful, natural. We avoid trails where if there's even oftentimes fast moving bicycles. Add the specter of e-bikes that could go faster on top of that. That's a bad thing for equestrians. What we're afraid of is the loss of traditional places, traditional users, as e-bikes get authorized more and more on non-motorized trails. We need to prevent that from happening. We need to speak out about trails that are important to us, and make sure that those trails do not become motorized. That's not to say there aren't places for e-bikes. There are, and there have to be. I would contend that in most cases, I would rather see e-bikes on motorcycle trails, motorized trails, or trails that were built specifically for e-bike use and the faster speeds. But I don't think we can get away with that completely. So there are some trails we might have to concede, but the important thing is hopefully they're not trails that we use that are important to us. So keep that in mind too. Enforcement is the key. And here, if you can read that headline, is that just last month, an e-bike company basically released over the air an update that you can use with your Bluetooth, pairing up with your e-bike, that can boost the electric speed by over 50%. And that's not the only thing. E-bikes can be programmed to be class 1, 2, or 3. There are some models that allow you to choose what class you want to be. And often if we're seeing the agencies approve only class 1 e-bikes use on a trail, there's no way to manage for that when with a change in program you can change the class. There's lots of workarounds because this is basically it's a governor. It's an electronic chip in an e-bike controller here that keeps the speed down, or at least cuts off the motor assisted speed at 20 or 28 miles per hour. So on YouTube, there's dozens of hacks, and I'll give you an example of some of those. I just pulled these, from it, but there's your little computer chip. There's various ways on little hacks, you know, for speed freaks and go twice as fast, and how to go faster by hacking the controller on your e-bike. Not difficult to do, apparently, and it's well known. So clearly enforcement is not the answer. And we even have many people saying we can't tell the difference between a class 1, 2, or 3 or an out of class e-bike. They all look the same. They don't have labels that declare what class they are, and as we know, that wouldn't be effective either. So basically what we're contending is BCHA, if an agency allows one class of e-bike to be used on a non-motorized trail, they're in effect allowing all classes of e-bikes, including these out of class ones, because law enforcement wouldn't be able to discern the difference. So that's a key point. It's really a slippery slope here we're talking about, or camel's nose under the tent, whatever you want to call it. Once you allow one type of e-bike, how does that not transcend to other types of e-bikes? How do you tell the difference? And when the technology changes, which it does every week, and if not sooner, we've got more torque, more things that these e-bikes can do. That changes the very nature of the experience on the trail, the safety of other users like us. That just creates all kinds of problems. And then as we get into those electric motorcycles with pedals, where do you draw the line? So slippery slope. A USA Today article earlier this year had some good quotes in it. And they even had a US Forest Service official, which I cite here, as basically saying, we just can't tell the difference out in the field. We'd be hard pressed to say who's violating which rules. And even then, if we gave tickets, we don't have enough people to patrol either the backcountry or appear in court over any citation on e-bikes. The Forest Service is conceding in those quotes that they can't control it if they allow it. So once the genie's out of the bottle, that's really it. And I don't know if you can see on your screen, if it's big enough, I like this bottom sticker here on the Carsonite post. It says, stop pretending your e-bike is non-motorized, because that's what we're going to hear from the e-bike proponents again and again. They're even going to say an e-bike isn't truly motorized. And we know that's not the case. It's laughable when they do that, but I've encountered that several times. So there's a link, and you can go to that for the USA Today article that appeared on that date. It's called "An Electric Bike Rode into the Backcountry. Now There's a Nationwide Turf War." And I think we know why. Because there's an unacceptable risk to us and the e-bike riders, quite frankly. Those speeds are just, and coupled with the silent approach, because e-bikes are very quiet. You can often hear a slight hum of the motor and the drivetrain engaging, but that's really about it. Some have chains, some have kind of more rubberized drive chains. It varies quite a bit, but we know that e-bikes can and do create conflicts between trail users and pose unacceptable risks to our safety on trails. And again, another real advertisement, it's you, only faster. There's one advertisement from a major US manufacturer that says it's not even a bicycle. It's, 750 watts of hair-raising power. That's how they're being marketed. This is the segment they're marketing to, not the adaptive or disability crowd or the elderly. They're going for the young jocks. And clearly e-bike speed is a concern. Here is a recent study done in the state of Washington that was issued last month that talked about, and I've circled 3/4 of equestrians say they're really concerned about speeds of e-bikes. And also a majority of hikers on that left-hand column also report the same. And this is not just a perception. We know what it's like when we're on a trail with a mountain bike, let alone an e-bike. This is a very real concern. And our opponents would try to say, well, you just haven't really, you don't know what an e-bike is. And there's probably been dozens of them that passed you and you didn't even know it. So hopefully through this webinar, you'll begin to be able to identify an e-bike, be able to know, when that's problematic, and send some reports our way. I'm always wanting to hear about good and bad encounters with e-bikes and what's going on, so we can better hone our arguments. But as we know, speed kills. This happened just last month in Marin County, California. This is a paved path, but it's a path nonetheless, and the pedestrian got ran over by an e-bike that was, under, what do they call it? it was under speed. In other words, they were applying the motor here. So in addition to the incompatibility and the danger, you know, it really does come down to this speed differential. If you and I, either on our foot or horse, travel maybe 3 to 5 miles per hour maximum on a trail, with bikes coming the other direction or behind us that can go 20 to 28 miles per hour, that's a significant difference in speed. Basically, it's like having automobiles, you know, buzzing by, and e-bikes are the automobile on our, you know, natural surface trails. They don't mix well in many cases. So I'm going to switch over to Brad here, and he's going to walk us through steps that you can take now to get geared up for the e-bike discussion locally.
Thank you, Randy. Basically, we want to start by engaging our local coalitions. Like it says here on the slide, you know, if they don't exist in your area, I think I want to talk to you about getting those coalitions up and running. And we won't spend a lot of time here on this webinar about it, but if you don't have those, I want you to realize that other BCH outfits across the country do. Southeast is a region is a great example of coalitions. And believe it or not, even here in the West, where I'm from, coalitions are important and used, and they've increased our participation and increased our numbers of agreeable things to comment on the government agencies. And that's what it takes when you're talking about participating in management decisions of the government agencies. Numbers count. And by ourselves, especially locally, our numbers aren't big enough to make a whole lot of difference. We get a little bit better difference because of the work that we do on the agency's public lands or on our public lands, but it still takes coalitions. So if you don't have coalitions going in your local area, and what I mean by coalitions are partnerships with other user groups, bird groups, hiking groups, mountain biking groups, motorized groups, cross-country ski groups, all of those are partners when they agree on certain issues that need to be commented on, and talked on, worked on for management decisions. So I'll leave that go. Contact me, contact the Education Committee if you want any more information on how to form coalitions. We've got a wide range of them out there, and they can even go bigger than local. They can go statewide. I was involved as a chapter president and then the state chairman in Montana in forming a Montana Trails Coalition. We were successful. It has all of the participants that I explained: Audubon Society, Bike Walk Montana, OHV groups. Backcountry Horsemen has a seat on the board because we were instrumental in getting the coalition going. So we can give you those experiences so that you can get that going in your neighborhood or your state. We're successful in getting state legislation to increase some funding. We now are responsible for $1.2 million of grant money available in the state of Montana for trails, solely because of that coalition. So that gives you a real example of how important these coalitions are. And then for today's message, it would be real important to learn about e-bikes through those coalitions and find out if your local mountain bike group feels like you do. And like we're presenting here, of the dangers and the concerns we have with e-bike use, especially on non-motorized trails. So coalitions are important, and we can help you form them. Going down the slide here, I probably covered most of those. There's a couple of really good links that Randy's provided on the slide where you can start and work with some local groups with respect to our mission here today in our e-bike. Calling the agencies. I'm not going to read the slides to you. You guys can all read. But getting the agencies, getting in contact and staying with those agencies, that's what we stress when we talk about our public lands people on a local level. Randy spoke earlier about the Forest Service position on e-bikes on non-motorized trails. Now, they didn't have an open advertised public comment when they aired that decision or made that decision. But I can assure you, and I know firsthand, the Backcountry Horsemen had some influence in that decision, or at least some input, whether we needed influence or not. Go ahead, Randy.
No, the Forest Service did actually invite for public comment, and we submitted public comments, as did thousands of other people. So no, that was a very open public process. It was the Department of Interior initially, when they did the secretarial order, that was kind of hiding the ball there, so to speak. But each of those interior agencies also did a rulemaking process, which allowed for public comment too. So the agencies have been above board in terms of telling us where they're headed with their regulations. It's just the Forest Service ones turned out better, in our opinion, than the Department of Interior agencies.
Okay, thank you for correcting me there. What I was getting at is, I know early on that we had contact with our local forest, and on a state level, we had actually had the forest, the regional forester contact us to get some input on what we thought about it, what we felt about it. And what I was what I'm getting at is, that's the importance of having that ongoing communication. If that relationship and communication is in place, then those managers are going to ask you your opinion, whether they're at the point where they're asking for public comment or not, just to kind of get a feel for what's going on and what the public wants. So yes, thanks for correcting me on that. Let's move on to the next slide. Again, that communication with your local agency, whether it be the Forest Service or who, will keep you informed on when they're making decisions, when the industry has contacted them, or when a ranger is proposed maybe a trail that you work on that they might want to allow e-bikes on. You've got to stay in tune and in communication with that governing agency in order to be aware of when this issue is coming up. We don't want to be behind the curve. We want to be out in front and participating in the beginning, rather than trying to change a decision that's already made. You can meet with them by phone, by Zoom. You can invite them to your chapter meetings. You can stop in when they're, most definitely stop in or meet with them, whether there's an issue going on or not. Again, that gets that relationship going. So when there is an issue, they're open, the door's open, and the lines of communication are open. Stop in and just ask them how it's going. Take them some cookies and see what's going on, what they're planning and what they're doing, especially in the wintertime when they're making plans for the next season, for the work they want to accomplish and the changes or rules they want to make. I guess next slide. Oh, wait, I'll talk, well, go ahead. The bottom line there talks about posting signs. I had a chapter meeting last Thursday, and that was talked about this webinar coming up, and that was one or two of the main suggestions that some of the signs that Randy's had on these slides. It would be good to take those, make a copy of those, take those down and talk to your governing agencies and offer up help to post these signs. And that might help them. I mean, they may not have the funds, or they may not have it in the plans or in the budget, but if you offer your chapter or your group, offer it up to them that you'll put those signs up for them, possibly even provide manufacturing those signs. Keep in mind, they'll have some requirements. It's a government agency. They'll have some sign requirements, but that can be done. All right, next slide. So the first part of this webinar was all about e-bikes, and there's some good links that Randy's put on here where you can go learn more about that. And we need to make ourselves aware of that and learn about those, because when it does come time, or when people are breaking the laws, or it does come time that we have to share some trails, that you've got a way to help police it, or help identify when the rules aren't being followed. So it's, make it a task. Make yourself and your chapters, maybe invite someone in your chapter that has an e-bike to bring it to one of the meetings. Figure out what they look like, how they sound, how they feel. That's going to help you and help us document what we need to document in order to manage this issue. And that comes into the documentation of it. When you do find places where they're not riding e-bikes and not supposed to, or you're in a forest that's already allowed, or an area that's already allowed some e-bike use, but they're going above and beyond what's allowed, document that. We need all of that documentation in order to continue in education and be able to justify what we're pushing for. I think I pretty well covered anything. Anything you want to add to that, Randy?
Sure. Just to become familiar, and yeah, some of our members no doubt do own e-bikes, and that's, you know, not a bad thing by any means. I'm sure they use them responsibly. I'd encourage folks to go to their local bike shop and take a look at what e-bikes they're selling, kind of learn about their capabilities, even take one for a demo ride or rent it for the day. I've done that for a few e-bikes and learned a lot about how they operate, how they're different. They're very different than regular mountain bikes. And quite frankly, one of the ones I rode, it was an out of class e-bike, but it scared the heck out of me about its potential and what kind of mayhem or problems it could cause coming around a corner if you encounter an equestrian. So, you know, really familiarize yourself with e-bikes. And Brad's point about documenting conflicts, this is key because we saw an e-bike approval for about 35 miles on the Tahoe National Forest last year. And one of the justifications was there had, in the environmental assessment, and the forest staff are saying there'd been no documented conflicts with other trail users. Well, if that's the case, that's probably a good thing. But I would hate for e-bikes to be authorized in cases where, you know, we know there's been conflicts. So report conflicts either to us, but more importantly, to that agency's law enforcement. Make sure it's on the record so they can't come back later and approve e-bike use and say, well, we haven't heard about any conflicts. If there are true, genuine conflicts, please document those. That is going to be really key in the discussion because without it, you know, we don't have a leg to stand on sometimes, given the lack of science we talked about before. So thanks, Brad. And no, those are really some great proactive steps to engage, and good examples from Montana too, about how being proactive and with partners and others. And to be clear, mountain biking organizations are often split depending on where they are in the country about whether they want to see e-bikes on their trails, non-motorized trails, you know, multi-use trails. So there's a good faction of many significant mountain bike groups who are opposed to e-bike use for a variety of reasons, but one of them is that they're afraid e-bikes are going to give them a bad name. And if there's a trail closure because of bike related damage or conflicts, they're going to close the trail to all bike use. That's one concern from mountain bike groups. There's other mountain bike groups that are totally okay with, you know, e-bikes primarily, you know, making a case that they think that class 1 e-bikes are fine, but anything beyond a class 1 is dangerous territory and don't want to go there. So be prepared to hear different opinions from mountain biking organizations about their relative support for e-bike use. But in the end, you know, a motor is a motor. And there's a little cutaway here about showing exactly how this motor, you know, is put together and why it looks like any other, you know, electric or not, looks like many motors that we're aware of. So after we talk about the proactive steps we can take to prepare for an e-bike discussion, you know, near you, once, you know, there hasn't been an e-bike proposal, here's our game plan for how we've approached it within BCHA on several occasions of recent. But as Brad said at the beginning of the webinar, we really need to make sure those communication lines are flowing and that your state public lands officer knows that this proposal has come forward, either on state lands or federal lands. You know, we want to hear about it, and we can, you know, adjust and you know, accordingly about how we might be able to help within BCHA. So, you know, all the details you can get as soon as you can get them, especially public comment periods. We would like to know, you know, as soon as you have that information. And it starts, you know, maybe by doing things you know intuitively already about what trails are already important to you in your chapter. I think, you know, if folks have the ability, they should start making notes and marking up maps by saying, you know, these are trails we just couldn't live with if we had to share them with e-bikes. you know, and even keep in your back pocket that last bullet here about trails you might concede for e-bike use. I know that sounds sacrilegious, but keep it in your back pocket and wouldn't share that widely. But if there are some concessions you would make, keep that in mind about where e-bikes use might be authorized. So we're just not saying hell no, no way, nowhere, but we're being constructive about, well, these are trails are important to us. We really don't want these ones, and maybe leave the other discussion to flow later about where e-bike use might be most appropriate. So we want to, you know, even in the public scoping period, for example, of many of the environmental assessments we've seen the federal agencies doing to try to authorize e-bike use, I want to reach out to that agency recreation planner, the NEPA planner or the trails planner, and really pick their brain in a very friendly way to learn more about the proposal and, you know, what's driving it, who's behind it, you know, what level of use they think they would get from e-bikes. So, you know, there are a number of things, and then we can start looking at the forest plan or the land management plan or the state park plan or whatever it is. At the federal level, they include maps of what they call the recreation opportunity spectrum, that even though it's not like zoning where it's cut and dry, it's kind of like a zoning map where they have preferred areas where motorized travel occurs and non-motorized travel prevails, including the primitive end of the spectrum, wilderness. But there's also other semi-primitive non-motorized areas outside of wilderness that the federal agencies put on their maps. That comes into play when we're talking about a motorized trail use like e-bikes. And we've already seen one agency propose e-bike use in a semi-primitive non-motorized area. Now, doesn't mean they can't do it, but they'd have to do a forest plan amendment probably. And that's another hurdle they would take that they might not want to do if that were the case. And then trail management objectives. At least we know with the Forest Service that has a pretty robust database in their their trails, their digitized trail information systems, that trail management objectives are supposed to have a, you know, a designed use and a managed use and a prohibited use on each trail. And if it prohibits motorized travel, for example, that can, you know, really help us. And if the designed and managed use is hike and horse, it's pretty hard to say that they're going to add e-bikes and that would be okay. So there are ways we can work with trail management objectives, you know, or whatever similar. Maybe the BLM has something, and they do have hit or miss, but they do have something similar about what their intent is when they created that trail and how they manage it now, that we can push back against. And again, we're talking about other trail users. We've had great success with partners from American Hiking Society, the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, and others who largely agree with our position, sometimes for their own reasons, you know, different reasons, but nonetheless share concerns about a broad proliferation of e-bikes on non-motorized trails. So, you know, maybe do some joint comment letters with them, other things that we can do once there's a proposal shaping up. Of course, attend the meetings, the scoping meetings, or any kind of public meetings about it to get more information, and be vocal, but not judgmental. You know, use your channels, your Facebook pages for your chapter and others to make other members aware of the deadline and submit public comments. And here's what BCHA can further do for you. As we've done in other places, we can help develop a list of talking points that you can share, you know, basically bulleted items that you can add to your letters to the agency about e-bike use that are, you know, tailored for that specific situation. So we've had members that use that bullet points and just, you know, put their name on it and submit it. Often others will elaborate. And what we want them to do is elaborate why it's important to them, why these trails are important to them, and how e-bikes would change the equation. But we can provide talking points that are tailored for personal letters. And then, you know, we can look closely at the supposed science if it's being cited about the impacts of e-bike use. So again, and I can send you, you know, information if we get to this point about why the IMBA study is not the end all. It's far from it in terms of delineating that, you know, e-bikes, class 1 e-bikes are no different in impact than regular mountain bikes. We can dispel those types of myths. And then we can submit comment letters. So that is my bread and butter for BCHA, and that's something I love doing. As painful as it is write multi-page, policy-based comment letters that really, question the agency and push back on, assumptions. So there's letters we've done in California, Arizona, New Mexico, and most recently Arkansas on that topic. And if we present them, and importantly, present them as a joint BCHA and the state BCH, it's powerful when the agencies look and see these comment letters and realize that there's these joint interests. And in some cases, as you can see on the mastheads, we've listed our other partners that joined us in those comments that share our concerns. And that is very powerful because we've had several positive outcomes, particularly in Arizona and New Mexico, where the agency has ultimately, in both cases, responded to our comments, amended the environmental assessment to drop the e-bike proposal because the hikers and horsemen just wouldn't have it. And they couldn't justify it on their end. The agencies were trying to speculate that maybe e-bike users would use it and it shouldn't be a problem. We showed them otherwise through our comment letters. So that's something I'm happy to do, that we're happy to do at BCHA. And that's another example of what BCHA does for you at the chapter level. And, even litigation is not out of the question. It's a heavy road, it's not to be engaged in lightly. And it's a last option, when you're up against the wall. But we've litigated this very issue with the Tahoe National Forest, along with BCH California and their mother lode unit and other partners that are listed there. We've engaged, attorneys, and we've settled and got exactly what we wanted out of that settlement, because in this case, the agency did not go through a public process, did not work with stakeholders or do an environmental review. They simply just declared that e-bikes could share 130 miles of non-motorized trails, some of which our local unit maintains and was never even aware of this proposal. So we were successful in pushing back against that, which I think some in the Forest Service, I say very few, because this was kind of a nefarious proposal, want to see if they could slip this one past everybody. And if they could authorize e-bike use on the Tahoe and no one said boo, then that would be a model that could be used elsewhere. We stopped that cold in their tracks. Of course, we have to thank the Wilderness Society, our partner, and the Western Environmental Law Center, who were key in helping us. But that is now, branded as the Backcountry Horsemen litigation against the Forest Service, and it wasn't adversarial. Folks in the Washington, D.C. office, totally understood where we're coming from and why we had to push back. And I think some were actually relieved that we did so. In fact, I know that they were, that we set the record straight and we made the agency follow their own policy. So now that we're just about up to the top of the hour, as Brad said, we're going to turn to questions, and we'll let Craig moderate some questions and direct them to us. And we hope to answer with the next half hour any outstanding questions you have going forward. Craig?
Okay, well, the first thing is that Randy and Brad, you can go down to the Q&A tab, and you should be able to click on that and see the questions that have been asked. And I'll let you guys decide how you want to answer those. Can you see them?
I can't yet. I'm just going to stop share screen because it blocks me from seeing that. So let me do that. And Brad, go ahead and take anything you can if you'd like.
Well, we've got one from Richard Livermore. If I'm reading that right. What are the suggested and solutions? I'm not quite sure what question he's asking there. Suggestions are: pay attention to what's going on in your area. Make sure that you inform your chapter and state, and make sure your state is informing the regional public lands. Randy and I will hear about that, and when we can step in to help you write letters or sign on anything that they're asking, sign on what's the word I'm looking for here, but we can help you do that through the examples of what we've done with other states and make sure that they're following the rules they need to be following. We can help you submit those comments as well, whether it's something they're proposing or or just something they're thinking about. You want to get involved early and stay ahead of the curve, and you'll be more successful that way. The next one, Randy, you seen that from?
Yeah, from Mitch Gibbs, who has a Class 1 e-bike. He's seen issues with regular mountain bikes, or at least more and more issues. And yeah, etiquette is certainly an issue. We're working with our partners, the International Mountain Bicycling Association, to develop, and they're already posted on the trailsarecommonground.org website on e-bike etiquette. And clearly that's something that, as more people who are not regular bikers, mountain bikers in this case, who might rent one at a shop or whatever and go out in the day, those folks aren't really steeped in the etiquette. And that's going to be certainly problematic, as you point out. Not that yes, there are cheaters that are going to cheat. I agree, irrespective. Any user group has that. But I'm more worried about the rookies, the folks who don't even know the rules of the trail or the etiquette rules. That resource that rests on trailsarecommonground.org is one place at least we can go. And what Dave Weens, the executive director of IMBA, is trying to do is share that information when it's in final form with e-bike manufacturers, with retailers, and other folks that rent bikes, to make sure that those are pretty clear, because we all have a vested interest to make sure that where e-bikes are legal to use, that folks understand the rules and know the rules of etiquette. The yield triangle, if you will, is one of those, where bikes and hikers yield in general to horses. So yeah, cheaters are going to cheat. And it looks like, Craig, you wanted to add an answer to that too. Is that correct?
No, I'm maintaining the list.
Okay. All right. I hope that answers the question. Brad, you want to handle Jill's question there?
Jill Mon. The local chapter should contact the state. Oops, it advanced on me. Hold on a second. State Public Lands, BCHA, to request the help Randy is speaking of. Here in Idaho, outside of Boise, BLM land on the Ohi Range, where e-bikes were previously riding, but signs are posted now for no e-bikes. So local chapters here, and 3 in the area, should contact the state public lands first. Yes, agreed. But when you're doing that, I agree with that statement. Should contact your agencies first, whether it's state or federal. But when you're doing that, if there's something going on that's happening, also contact the BCH of A chain through your public land, so that we can be aware that situation is happening, and we can kind of pre-prepare on how to help you if it escalates past the state. Otherwise, we're kind of behind the curve. We hear about it and you've already taken action, and we need to be part of it in the beginning is what we hope to get out of that. So good question.
Yeah, Jill, and I've been in the Oahe Range. I forget who the public lands representative for BCH Idaho is in southern part of the state. I know in northern it's Rod Parks, but make sure they're in the loop and start that discussion. So when they have the regional discussion, that's brought up quickly, especially if there's new proposals. But it sounds like there's signs posted now for no e-bikes, but there's still some type of trespass, it sounds like. But yeah, certainly let the agency know and document if these are areas that are important to you.
And next one's from Megan Casey. Thanks so much for the info. Where will the slides be posted? I would like to dig into some of these links and provide it in the deck. So Craig, can you answer how to get those and where they're going to be posted?
First of all, we'll post the presentation and the recording of the webinar on the BCHA shared drive to Google. It'll take a couple of days in order to do that. Meanwhile, if you have a question, you can email me at the education chair, and I can send you a copy of the slides that Randy has presented, but they'll also be filed on the BCHA shared drive as well. And Brad, you may wish to talk to Mark Himmel about posting the slide deck to the website public lands page as a direct download if you want.
I'll see to that.
Hey,
Thank you.
Brad, I'm going to interpret a question here.
Go.
And this was from Mr. Livermore. I think what might he be asking about is win-win solutions between horseback use and e-bikes. And certainly there could be. I mean, who are we to say what works out at the local level? I would think some of the variables you would need to share trails with e-bikes safely is that there are good lines of sight. There's little potential for super high speeds to be attained by that e-bike. And that, you know, there's lots of information available at the trailhead for, you know, etiquette and how to yield, etc. And that's invariably going to happen. There are ways, I don't know of, well, let me give you an example. I think it's called the Corner Canyon system. Craig, that near Provo? No, that's to the south of Salt Lake.
Correct.
What town again is that?
It's South Salt Lake.
Okay, the Corner Canyon Regional Trail System has multi-use trail system set up that allows for mountain biking, separate trails in some cases for hiking, equestrian, etc. But the mountain biking trails, some of which allow class 1 e-bikes. They've created a trail system there that our local chapter says that they're, you know, all in all are quite happy with. There's a separation of uses in some cases. There is some shared use, but there are model trail systems that can be developed. And that's another thing we're trying to work with via Trails Are Common Ground, is to develop that criteria or case studies about where people are sharing trails in harmony, including e-bikes, and what variables are included. You know, even directional trails, you can only go downhill on this segment. For crowded trails is a big improvement for bikes, and those can lead to win-wins if we're talking about shared trail system and minimizing conflicts. So just wanted to put that out there that yes, there's certainly examples, and we're going to try to highlight more via our work with Trails Are Common Ground and IMBA.
Couple of things here on the question deal from Chuck. I'm having a hard time reading that. I got to put my glasses on to read, take them off to see what's going on. But basically, there's Cheryl Roth has a question as well. Both of those respond to commenting on improper use of e-bikes. I mean, I'm going to answer kind of both of those together, and I'll give you an example. When there's laws being broken, whether it be with e-bikes or motorized or chainsaws or whatever the case may be, when there's laws being broken or rules not being followed, there's different ways to report those, and they should be reported to the local agency. Here in Montana, our Forest Service doesn't have the law enforcement manpower to handle all of the trailheads and the different trails and things that are going on. So they work in conjunction with our local county sheriff's department, and they've developed a form which is easily done. It's just a reporting form for anything that's being broken, leaving unattended fires, where you can jot down the time of day, where it's at, the location, any information you may have, license plate numbers, take pictures, whatever, and just pass that report along to either or the Forest Service or the Sheriff's Department. And even if they can't take a specific action on that specific case, they'll have a standing record of what's going on, and maybe they should patrol that trail or that trailhead more often than they do the others, because that's where they're getting the most reports. Basically, what you want to be doing is being the eyes and ears for law enforcement. And I don't want to by any means suggest that you have a conflict or that you engage with those that are breaking those rules and laws. Leave that up to law enforcement, leave it up to the government agencies that are responsible for that. But just be another set of eyes and record those incidents and record those happenings and get them to the people you need to. Basic information, time of day, location, what was happening, and then any evidence you can get without getting yourself in a conflict. I think
that's
that
good.
should probably answer.
Good advice. Hey, and I'll also add, Brad, both in response to Chuck and Cheryl. First of all, there's no set form yet, and perhaps we can create a e-bike trespass form or incident reporting form, much like we have the horse camp incident reporting form on our website. Sounds like there's a need for that, but no, Chuck, there's no standard kind of process. Clearly, the details where, land jurisdiction, was it Forest Service, state lands, what occurred, who got injured, names, all the details are helpful. so we can piece together these examples without just saying an anecdote. We heard of someone in Northern California who got killed. We want, like I showed that one slide, even a press, article on the very topic. It's hard to refute that those things happen that way. But we'll develop a form, I believe, and put it online for folks to use. But it's going to have those variables and others that we can think of. But we don't have any good examples yet of where we've documented an e-bike trespass or an incident and to have those variables down pat. But thanks for asking the question.
Looks like we've got a couple of new ones here. Nancy Stevens, I was once told by the University of Central Florida. I'm reading these because do the participants see these questions or just we seeing them? You're muted. Craig, you're muted. Does everybody see these?
They do not see the questions. So
okay.
You need to
I
read
was
them.
once told by the University of Central Florida researcher working with a developmentally disabled children, 2 to 3 years of old children and horse processed information at the same rate, and that was one reason why loud noises and fast action disturbed them both. My may sound far out, but if there was any research out there about horse brain information processing that might help regulators understand why fast is so frightening to horses. Sounds interesting. That's an interesting concept I haven't given much thought. I would like to add a comment to that. It's not really a question, but one of the ways that we educate, especially our new land managers, is we invite them on a project and or a trail ride. Get them to know firsthand what it's like to be in the saddle on a horse. And that can help you in many, many ways, not just this. So that would be an added suggestion. How about Randy? How about the next one?
Yeah, Lynn Hokana asks, have you seen the use of electric hoverboards on non-motorized trails? She says she has. Lynn has. So I have not personally. I've been told the same thing, electric hoverboards. Well, and this is this evolving technologies discussion, right? That's what e-bikes are. They're an evolving technology. Whether it's electric hoverboards or scooters or something that have the big knobby tires and that are trail ready, this is what frightens us, that when does the agency say enough is enough? It's a motorized technology. It's not appropriate on non-motorized trails. I think we draw the line now on e-bikes, and fight tenaciously for that because of that slippery slope that we talked about before. And so, yeah, it's problematic because emerging technologies. Now I'll go back to Chuck because he's just wanted to clarify. He's not talking about documenting rule breaking. He's asking, that they've been raising the alarm about this potential for safety and the impact of e-bikes. Are there examples where this has happened? So again, if I'm interpreting this correctly, so far it's just anecdotal, Chuck. I mean, other than the fatality in Marin County, California, we're pointing to anecdotes, and that doesn't help our case. So
I can add a little bit to that. I mean, we've heard some rumors of different things through the public lands, and we're trying to get documentation on them. But just like there's no information yet on the impact they may have on a trail, because it's so new, it's just a matter of time before we get some documentation. But we don't know of any as of yet. There are some incidents that have been talked about the lack of knowledge to those who are buying e-bikes from the manufacturers or the salespeople, and that they're actually getting themselves into trouble just because they don't realize, they give you an example, go buy a couple e-bikes and give them to their kids and don't realize, that they would never do that with a motorcycle, but they're doing that with a bicycle. So yeah, there's no real documentation of any incidences as of yet, but that's what we're looking for in our communication.
And Chuck, this is in the context of natural surface trails. There is a lot of studies, especially in Europe, about e-bikes in a commuter sense on paths and accidents with pedestrians at an increased rate, accidents that resulted in the e-bike riders having more severe head injuries because of the faster speeds, and the fact that bicycle helmets are not meant to withstand the speeds that e-bikes can go, in a crash. There's lots of data that one could, kind of apply to, well, this should be the same on natural surface trails, but no, that's where the delineation is. There are studies that talk about, and yes, clearly point the finger at e-bikes being dangerous to pedestrians and otherwise on, on roads and paved pathways.
So Jill's asking more again, would BCHFA want this information also, or does the organization already have the ability to get the information? I don't think I would turn down, Randy, you can correct me if I'm wrong, any information. As long as we've got an issue going on like this, we'd be more apt to read what you're sending us and decide whether it can help us or not, rather than let you decide. So yeah, any and all information we're open for. Thank you.
Please, that'd be great, Jill. Yeah, and I think that's a pretty fascinating idea. Any kind of physiological studies or something, how horses react, is helpful to add to that equation, because a lot of land managers don't know what we know about, how horses view the world, etc. So any good documentation would be great. Thank you.
I say BCHMO Missouri holds the land managers ride every year to educate our land managers about trails, horses, and why this is important to us. Jane, thank you. That's a fine example of how to educate the land managers on what it's like to interact with other users on the trail. Perfect.
Question from Mitch Gibbs. There are some areas where neighboring trail systems have different rules for e-bikes. We know that's true. Is there anyone studying different experiences when conditions are very similar? It seems like an opportunity to build an objective case. Now, you're right, Mitch. This kind of comparison side by side, even the same kind of ecotypes, it would be really interesting. I don't know the answer to that. It's an intriguing question where one could then kind of, I guess, ultimately have to query trail users at the end of their ride, hike, etc., about their experience and if they encountered e-bikes. There's one intercept study that was done in Colorado that I'd say is tainted. They're not comparing an area that had e-bikes or not, but they just queried people when they came off the trail about their experience with e-bikes. And of course, this was several years ago. Most people didn't even know what an e-bike looked like, so they couldn't really respond, to that study. But I like that idea about looking at neighboring trail systems and if there are different rules of e-bikes and how one could query. It sounds like more an academic exercise, query the users to get information about the experience, on those different trail systems, and then look at the differences. Intriguing idea. I don't know if we have the ability to pull that off, but I certainly can try to plant a seed with some other researchers out there.
No, I don't see any more questions. There's quite a bit of stuff in the chat, most of it positive comments. So I want to thank everybody involved with putting these webinars together, especially Randy. I think this has been pretty educational. It looks like we got another question there. You want to take that one, Randy? Edith?
From Edith. Yeah. Hey, Edith. So she says there are same problems on state-owned lands as well as federal, but some of these areas have no BCHA chapters. Is there a way that these trail riders on state lands can access this material for help with their landowners? If you're talking about the webinar, let's talk offline, Edith, about specific folks you want to share that with. Again, the materials would be on BCHA's member site, so it's not accessible to the broader public, but we certainly can find ways to make it available if there's a need. So thanks for bringing that up, Edith.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add, for those of you that wanted to share this webinar, to access this webinar for other groups or groups that you're involved with that aren't necessarily BCHA, we don't want to be rude. We just had to draw the line somewhere. The numbers were starting to collect up pretty high on participant registration, and it's awful hard to control who's coming in and not without having them be members, and we don't want to have an experience where others kind of bombarded or overrun our webinar. Now that it's been recorded and presented, I think it would be safe to say, and any of my cohorts here can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't see any reason why it couldn't be shared. So it wasn't that we didn't want to provide this information to everybody. We just had to protect our method by limiting the numbers. Does that sound reasonable, Craig and Randy?
Yep.
Yeah, there's no trade secrets here, you know, that we're divulging.
All right. And that seems to be about it. Looking through some of the chats. Don't know if you two have had a chance to do that.
I think we've got it covered.
I do. Well, I hope you all have enjoyed this, and I encourage you to participate in your public lands if you're not already. And I want to take the opportunity to thank each and every one of you for what you do for Backcountry Horsemen. If it isn't for you, we wouldn't be here. So thank you very much. That's all I have.
I'm good too. Thank you very much. I appreciate folks spending a Saturday listening to a couple talking heads, but this issue is important. And as we said before, we're not villainizing e-bikes or e-bike users, because we know some of our own members that have mentioned that in chat love their Class 1 e-bikes, but they use them only on paved, trails and roads. That's great, because they provide lots of advantages for folks. We know that. So we enter that space, cognizant of the advantages for certain populations, or just the interest of people wanting to use e-bikes. We can't, say that's a bad thing by any means. In fact, it's a good thing, because they're enjoying their great outdoors, and that's what we're all about too. So thank you, Craig, for coordinating this. Appreciate it very much.
My pleasure.
And with that, I think we can close out.
Goodbye, all.
All right,
Keep
thank
saddle
you.
up.
Bye.
We done recording?
I'm stopping it now.